Of the Personnel and Animal Welfare Committee to order. Present are Councilmember O'Farrell and myself, Councilmember Koretz. I'm going to recommend that we put several items on consent. Item 2, 3, and 4 to approve those exempt positions. Item 5 to note and file the motion which relates to the CRA and is now a moot issue. And item 7 on voluntary deductions for GLAZA to put on consent to ask the CAO to report back on whether GLAZA meets the parameters for a voluntary deduction, which they need to know before we can actually discuss the merits of the item. So without objection, I'd ask that 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7 be put on consent. It's been moved, and that will be the order. So let's start with the 2 remaining items. Item number 1.
Item number 1, communication from the mayor relative to the appointment of Ms. Rhonda Hillier to the Employee Relations Board for the term ending September 23rd, 2017. This matter is also scheduled for council confirmation on March 26th.
And we welcome Ms. Hillier. Would you like to come up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And we know you have a lot of experience in the labor relations field, so I wonder if you could speak to your background.
I started in the mid-'70s as a labor organizer for the hotel employees, restaurant employees, and I want to disclose that I negotiated across the table with Hugo Rossiter at Boeing, and he was a worthy, I don't want to say adversary, but a worthy negotiator. After about 20 years of representing employees, I started a small business, which I've had for the last 23 years, dedicated to helping parties work through problems together, amicably, supporting their interests. And I found that in doing so, sometimes conflict is inevitable, but adversarialism is not. And so my focus is, and I work with labor and management daily, is to help the parties develop respectful relationships and reach agreements that last and that work for all parties. I've worked in the city of LA. I work with the Metropolitan Transit Authority, the Water District, number of agencies in this area, as well as up and down the West Coast over the last few years and throughout the United States.
And I know you say that you're a neutral. Can you describe what exactly that means?
Well, I actually think I am an advocate in the sense that I have a deep respect for both management and labor, and I want to see all parties come out of agreements believing that their interests were met to the extent possible. As a neutral, I try to work very hard to help the parties open lines of communication, collaboratively problem solve, and reach agreements that, again, work for both of them. I don't take sides, and I try to evaluate the facts, but I'm also not a decision maker in my role as a neutral. I understand that would be a little bit different on this board.
Mr. O'Farrell, you have a question?
I do not.
We have one speaker from the public, James Johnson, from SEIU 721 and the Coalition of City Unions.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. James Johnson on behalf of the Coalition of City Unions and SEIU 721. We, applaud Mayor Garcetti for this appointment of someone who is obviously extremely experienced in labor relations, and as a neutral third party, we have no concern regarding that whatsoever. However, as we've stated in a previous hearing regarding appointments to the ERB, we do continue to have concerns regarding a process that employee organizations once had in the selection of members of the board, since it is an employee relations board. So we simply wanted to put that on the record, but nevertheless, the principles of the coalition have met. With Ms. Hillier, we stand ready to work with her, as I'm sure other employer organizations are, to work with her to continue harmonious labor relations here in the city of Los Angeles. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm not sure we have much to say about that process. I think that's largely a decision for the mayor, but I think we all can agree that whichever the process was, we're very fortunate to have someone come through it as qualified as Ms. Hillier. So we thank you for your willingness to serve in this position and look forward to the good work that you'll do with the city.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And without objection, this appointment will be approved. And now item number 6.
Item number 6, continued for March 20th, 2012, Department of Animal Services report in response to motion Cardenas Rosendahl relative to the implementation of an annual cap on the amount of dog licensing revenue deposited into the general fund based on fiscal year 2009-10 amounts and any additional revenue collected over the cap being deposited into the Animal Welfare Trust Fund. This matter has also been referred to the Budget and Finance Committee.
You want to make any opening?
Sure. Thank you, Councilman. Good afternoon. John Chavez with the Department of Animal Services. 3 years ago, Councilman Cardenas introduced a motion to cap the licensing revenue that went into the general fund at $850,000. Any amount over that would go into the the sterilization trust fund. The way this revenue is created, for every $20 dog license that we sell for a sterilized animal, $7 stays in the animal sterilization fund, $13 goes to the general fund. And also for the $100 license, that's for intact animals, $2 stays in the sterilization fund, and $98 goes to went to the general fund. So to give you the context of how much revenue is being created as a result of this arrangement, last year the animal sterilization fund received $900,000, the general fund got $1.6 million. Our report's 2 years old. When we made the recommendations a couple years ago, we asked that any amount above the cap go to the Animal Welfare Trust Fund instead of animal sterilization. We're not proposing that any longer. In fact, we recommend that our report be noted and filed. We're not pursuing a cap. We're not pursuing money being redirected to, additional money being redirected to our trust funds. Currently, the issue that we have, and we're working with the mayor's office and the CAO, has to do with the subsidy that goes into the animal sterilization fund. As you may know, the city in the past has provided up to $1.1 million to go into the sterilization trust fund. It was reduced to $710,000. So we're trying to see if next year's budget we could get the $400,000 restored. So again, with respect to this report, we're recommending that it be noted and filed.
And the one thing that's bothered me, and I've watched this for a few years, is that to get to a no-kill system, clearly one of the things we have to do is more spay and neuter. And yet we've had a lot of money that we've never used. And we could even try leveraging it and asking that we have a match from private organizations that do spay and neuter. There's a lot we could be doing, but why we would be sitting on that money is a mystery to me. Why are we not finding a way to spend that money every year? Because there seems to be, I'd say, close to an infinite need. Mm-hmm. I mean, at some point you would do what this suggested, that you'd say, well, the need is going down, let's put the money somewhere else. But I think it would probably take millions of dollars a year before we'd hit that point. So why haven't we been finding a way, if it's a need to hire people, hiring them? Why aren't we doing whatever we need to do?
We have two things coming up in April next month. ASPCA will be operating the spay and neuter clinic at the South LA shelter. That contract's an additional $500,000. And then we're going to be we have already released, and we're selecting an additional vendor to provide mobile spay and neuter services. That would be an additional $500,000. So there's an additional $1 million more that would be tapped into using animal sterilization funds to increase sterilization throughout the city.
Are we are we also targeting it geographically? I mean, there's certain logical things that we would do, like go into areas that have an excess of pit bulls and try
Yes.
to focus on sterilization.
On the mobile spay and neuter vehicle, we are targeting 10 zip codes. These are the zip codes that have the highest intake of, from those zip codes, we have the highest intake of animals going into our shelter. They have a disproportionate number of animals from those zip codes going into our shelters. So we are recommending, and then we're looking at poverty as another indicator as well. So on the mobile spay and neuter RFP, we expect to have a recommendation before our board next week, in fact. We are looking at that, Councilman, looking at zip codes that present the most problems with intake of animals into our shelters.
Now, does that still leave a lot of unspent money in the fund, even with those couple of $500,000 programs?
We have existing contracts right now totaling $2 million with one mobile spay and neuter contractor and 2 contractors that do in-house spay and neuter in our shelters. So we've been discussing this matter with the CAO for next year in terms of our budget. We think that the amount of money that we'll be spending next year and even this year will be higher just because we're doing these newer initiatives with increased sterilization throughout the community.
Okay, and I've got other questions, but I'll let Mr. O'Farrell ask some of his.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with you completely, Mr. Chair, in terms of the infinite need that's out there. And I mean, I think every day our animal friends, our animal community faces a holocaust that never gets seen. And I know that every year money from this spay-neuter trust fund gets swept into the general the general budget. And so I'm very reluctant to I have a lot of reluctance supporting the department's position on this. So a couple of questions that I would have would be in terms of, Mr. Chair, you mentioned outreach. We're planning an outreach event this summer at Echo Park Lake when we reopen the lake for the Lotus Festival. And Christine, how many visitors come to that? 51. Okay, 51. 50 to 100. So tens of thousands of people. We're going to make pet adoption a key piece of that entire event. And with that, I would love to give thousands of free vouchers for spay-neuter for anyone who will adopt an animal or anyone who just has an animal at home that they want to spay-neuter. I sense that we could do so much better with just outreach and providing vouchers and using this money to spay and neuter our animals and really put a dent in the spay-neuter or the euthanasia rate in Los Angeles. So even though we have these partners coming on in line, ASPCA and all that, that's great, but I think it might be a little premature to rely on those agencies. I think that all the resources that we can identify and stick with for spay-neuter is the way to go. That's how I feel about this. I might have a few questions after you have others too. Thank you.
Councilman, we'd be happy to arrange with you and provide the mobile spay and neuter van to attend that particular event, as well as maybe even a mobile pet adoption. So we'd be happy to work with you and Christine on this matter.
I want it to be really, really a main feature of the whole festival.
You got it.
We're not allowing sales of turtles or any of that stuff anymore. It's a new era, and we mean business about spay, neuter, and animal adoption.
Sure.
Yeah, one thing I'd like is if we could get a report back on spay and neuter, how much money was spent the last 5 years, how many animals were spayed and neutered, cats versus dogs and the breakdown, shelter pets versus the general public's pets, the amount of subsidies that went to Best Friends or any other programs, and what the future plans are for the next coming few years in spay and neuter. so we could get more of a handle on this. I think we want to be more certain that the money actually is getting spent. For me, I sort of feel a little bit like the situation we had with the rape kits, where we knew there was a need, we knew it would give you a direct line to a number of criminals, and yet we somehow couldn't expend the money and get those things done. I think we want to really have a closer watch on that, in the coming couple of years to make sure we really start spending that money.
Mr. Sheriff, you've made me think of another question, or I have a
Please.
few. And that is, can the Spay-Neuter Trust Fund money be spent on public service announcements?
We have the Animal Welfare Trust Fund that can be used for that. Spay and Neuter Trust Fund can only be used for sterilization type purposes, but we have another trust fund that we can use, Councilman, for public services announcements, and we have used it before for that purpose.
Just getting the word out. To tag along to Mr. Koretz, in terms of the questions, maybe you report back with this, what's the breakdown for shelter pets versus the general public? What's the ratio of subsidies or funds that went to nonprofits? And do these plans include licensing incentives? And then, just the voucher distribution piece.
Okay.
I mean, could you hire people contractors to distribute vouchers more widely across the city? And I would love to know which the 10 zip codes are as well.
I'm sorry, what was that?
The 10 zip codes
of
the high
sure.
shelter propensity.
Yes.
And a couple other questions. When the ACOs and LAPD are out in the field, ideally they should be able to distribute spay and neuter vouchers. But in the past, the feedback was that the department wasn't able to track redeemed vouchers well enough, and that was a reason not to do it. Have we found a fix for that?
We're always very concerned about the release of vouchers in the field, as long as we work closely with our accounting section so that we have a system in place to track those. We're open to looking at those ideas, Councilman. So we can make that part of our report back, see if we can work closely with LAPD on the distribution of that.
That would be great. And one other thing, hopefully you could include in that report back, would be a follow-up on animals that leave the shelters unaltered.
Okay.
Fosters, animals that are too sick, animals that are too young, and what the follow-up period is, and how we follow up, and whether we actually follow up and verify spay and neuter.
Okay.
How many never respond and we never follow up. So if we could look at all those issues as well. And we may have more things that we want to ask you to look at once we hear from the public. And we have a few speakers. Phyllis Doherty, followed by Tracy Jones.
Good afternoon, Phyllis Doherty. I will speak differently than I intended because I wanted to be sure that you understood these issues about the Pet Sterilization Fund. The only concern I have with what Mr. Chavez just said is about spending money out of the Animal Welfare Trust Fund for PSAs regarding spay and neuter. It's restricted from activities in regard to spay and neuter. So there probably is a provision in that fund, that this Pet Sterilization Fund, that you can use some of that for getting the word out, because that's the same issue. I just want to tell you that the way I got into animal work here in Los Angeles is because of the misuse of funds that were going for spay and neuter being put into a slush fund, a savings fund, by all of the shelters, by the people that didn't use them, didn't come back to get their deposits. That's how we started the coalition that started doing the telephone work, and we were doing up to 2,000 referrals. I would suggest to you one thing that will really help, if you can make it as easy as possible for your veterinarians to get, if there's a fax or phone method by which they can get authorization for the voucher without that person having to be told, oh, you're here with your animal, you can't afford it, you got to go to the shelter and get a voucher. If there's some way by telephonically or electronically that those vouchers can be sent right over to the vet, and they can go ahead and do them while the animals are there, that would help a lot. Also, when we start administrative citations, that will help, because then they will have the officers really concerned with the care of the animals and being able to actually say, if you don't follow the law, there will be a citation issued. You might as well go ahead and spend your money on getting your animal taken care of, treating it well, rather than having us to spend that as a fine. So I just want to thank you for your support of spay-neuter. This is so important, and we have to be very careful how we spend tax money, which is what licensing is. Thank you.
Thank you. Tracy Jones, to be followed by someone whose name I can't read. It looks like Tier first. That's probably not right, but Terry.
Terry.
Okay. Hard to read. Sorry about that.
Okay, my name is Tracy Jones, and Sue Taylor, the Executive Director of Actors and Others, asked me to read a letter on her behalf. It says, Actors and Others for Animals was founded in 1971 and is one of the oldest and most respected animal welfare organizations in Los Angeles. Our main mission is to curb the pet overpopulation problem through subsidizing spay and neuter surgeries. We are strong advocates of dog licensing and differentials that allow dog owners who sterilize their pet to receive a reduced license fee, and equally support the city providing financial aid to pet owners to spay and neuter their pets. We urge you to support the original March 23, 2011 motion by Councilman Cardenas to cap the licensing revenue and place any excess revenue collected into the Animal Spay and Neuter Trust Fund. While that motion caps the amount at $850,000, we do recommend that the additional provision be added that any capped amount be reviewed on a timely basis. As succinctly stated by Councilman Cardenas in his motion, during this period of limited resources, the Department's spay and neuter services should be preserved as they are an effective tool for increasing the number of sterilized pets and decreasing the intake numbers at city animal care centers. We couldn't agree more. In fact, spaying and neutering remains the simplest and most effective way of reducing pet overpopulation. The Department of Animal Services continues to be committed to an untenable belief that it is the number of animals that they can discharge from the shelters by any means possible that controls the shelter's populations. But the ultimate and most important goal must be stopping the animals from entering the shelters, and the foundation for that has always been and continues to be spay-neuter. Ms. Barnett is simply wrong to conclude that now is the time to limit financial aid for spay-neuter. Conversely, it is the most important time because now, after decades of hard work convincing pet owners of the need to sterilize their pets, more and more citizens are realizing the need. The biggest barrier to low and or fixed income pet owners is cost. We must remain vigilant or face increased shelter intakes and adverse animal issues of all types. Thank you for your consideration and of this letter and your support of the March 23, 2011 by Councilman Cardenas. Sue Taylor.
Thank you.
It's Terry Austin.
I am Terry Austin from the Amanda Foundation, and I'm glad to hear Mr. Chavez say that this isn't an issue. We were very worried about it. What I'm still concerned about, though, is the budget. With the two pieces of paper I gave you and I highlighted, Mr. Chavez accurately said about how that there's 4 contracts out that are now have a maximum commitment of $500,000 each. We're one of them, and the budget information, and it's impossible for them to keep it right up to the minute because you never know when these things come up on agendas. But the money that we've used actually is $100,000 more than what's stated here. It's $278,000 of our 500, and we're not finished with the third quarter yet. So we will come close to our 500,000, and in some years we've exceeded that. And what I'm worried about is with another RFP coming out, the idea of having lots of spay-neuter out there is excellent, but I hope that it doesn't become an issue where our budget gets sliced because there's more programs out there that are not being as efficient or maybe targeting what we want. The reason I brought you those photographs is that's just a small slice of the people that we serve. Our program truly is free. We subsidize it along with the city. The city pays us approximately two-thirds of the cost of each surgery. So we're subsidizing. Every surgery we do costs us more money. We don't profit by this program. We are the only program that is absolutely free. All the other programs have a subsidy that you have to go get the voucher. I would ask you to look at some of my clients. They're not going to have the opportunity to get the voucher. They don't have the transportation to get to them. And the idea of having a fair where we're going to have thousands of people come, again, is great. And we will get thousands of people, and we'll be there. We'll have the spay-neuter program, and it's a great opportunity. But the people that are the most animals are coming from are the most underserved. Unfortunately, they're probably not going to come to Echo Park, my people out of Watts. And I'm just worried that the most underserved will be denied if our budget in any way is impacted because of what's going on in terms of spreading out the money too thin. The vouchers reach a certain group of people who have the wherewithal to know about them and go get them and then apply them, because it's quite a process. I don't know if you're aware of the voucher. It's not just pick up a voucher and go. You know, it's a process. A lot of my people are just not going to be those voucher people, and they are the people where the vast majority of animals ending up in the shelter are coming from. So that's my concern about how the money is divvied up. Okay, thank you.
And we can have our rep from Animal Services come back. My understanding of the last issue is that their funding shouldn't be impacted by this. What we're asking is that rather than be spread too thin, that we be spread thinner.
Mm-hmm.
That in effect we've had too modest programs and we need to do more, but not that we're cutting from any existing programs.
That's correct. We've projected our budget, and we're able to fit in the Amanda Foundation as well as the ASPCA coming online. We'll make that, Councilman, a part of our report back. We'll show you what our budget is this year and also projected for next year to answer some of those questions.
And I think to go along the lines of a couple of comments that were made, are there ways to streamline the voucher process? Can we have you look at that in your report back as well? Is there a way for vets to obtain a voucher when they have the client in their presence but not the voucher? Are there steps in the voucher process currently that could be cut out or made simpler?
Okay.
So if we could look at those issues as well.
The recent deviation that we made in terms of getting the voucher out, we did submit an application that we sent to all the council offices to make it a little bit easier to get that voucher. But there's probably things that we can do to make it even easier. So we'll look at distribution, how to get the vouchers out there to the people that need it most.
Mr. O'Farrell, any other questions or things to add?
Thank you, Mr. I agree again with you, and I would not support a reduction in funds for who we contract out with either at all under any circumstance. So I think you made great points, Terry. I have one thing is that years and years ago, the council offices were able to distribute vouchers to constituents in need. Could you reinstitute that, for example? We work very closely with all of our community members, all of the organizations, the neighborhood councils, improvement associations, et cetera. So I think that we could be a good partner in that. And I'm with you, Mr. Kretz, and Terry, what your comments as well. We've got to make it real easy for people who don't have the wherewithal, who are just scraping by, who have animals. We can't be sending them from one thing to the next just to get a free voucher. That defeats the whole entire purpose. We should put our feet firmly in their shoes when we craft the way we distribute vouchers and make it really, really easy for them. That should be our mission. But I have a question for you. If you could just go over again the whole license issue for unaltered pets, the $2 versus the $98. $98 to the general, $2 to the spay-neuter.
That's correct.
How could we change that equation?
I'm not sure
How does that design that way?
Councilman, I might be able to address that. Janice Yu from the Office of the CAO. I think the original license fee development, most license fees go to the general fund, as it was mentioned that, and the city attorney can help me on this, that is like a tax type of revenue. And so all these funds go to the general fund. And at some point early on in the establishment of the sterilization fund, it was determined that that some funding should go into the sterilization fund to help with the cost of sterilization. So I believe a $2 and $7 surcharges were added to the license fee, and those went into the sterilization fund. So it wasn't really like it started in the sterilization fund and eventually got transferred to the general fund. It was added on to the license fee and redirected to the sterilization fund to support specifically animal sterilization.
One question that begs in terms of the history, why is a sterilized animals fee directed so heavily towards the spay and neuter fund, and the unsterilized animal only has the tiniest percentage? It would almost make more sense to go the other way.
I don't know the history on that. But.
Either of you know how that happened?
I think the original idea was that some small amount of each go into the sterilization fund. When the altered dog license fee was increased several years ago, as part of that increase, I think that money was then put into the sterilization fund, and since the unaltered fee had not changed from that $100, it simply wasn't touched. There was just a historical anomaly. Your point is well taken, though, since it does seem that the money from the unaltered fund should also go to help sterilizations.
At least a less modest amount than $2 out of 100. That's really tiny. So I don't know if there's a way to look at that as part of the budget process and maybe bring that back along with the many other questions that we've given you.
Okay.
And I don't know if is 30 days long enough?
30 days fine.
Okay. So without objection, we will ask that that report come back in 30 days, and we will otherwise note and file item number 6.
Thank you.
And with no other speakers, no other business. Oh, if there was a speaker slip, I may not have gotten it. Let's. Oh, I'm sorry. I do have one that came through. My mistake. So my apologies. One more speaker from the public, and maybe a second one on this item. Whitney Smith.
Whitney Smith. I'm a rescuer welfarist. I just want to say thank you, Councilmember O'Farrell and Koretz, particularly for your focus on spay and neuter, and particularly Councilmember O'Farrell for your laser focus on the topic and your desire to create a community event that doesn't just have merchandising but really tries to make a difference. 2 things. I realize I mostly worked most of my life and still work in the private sector, and I realize public sector doesn't work with the lightning speed of, say, the entertainment industry where it has to be done yesterday. But I know LAPD cop that has suggested the ability to distribute vouchers in the field as well as ACOs. This topic has gone on for years. So reports, they come, they don't come, they're asked for, they drift into the ether. Please make deadlines for these reports, because we all would like to see the answers, particularly a lot of the questions that you were asking, like detailed numbers. What are we getting per animal? What is the cost per animal? Not just what is the cost, so we can see how they can be best allocated. As for giving out spay neuter vouchers, I worked at a low-income vet clinic on near Exposition in Crenshaw. I would say 80% of the low-income people coming in never even heard of a voucher. Our lips were falling off explaining over and over, you can get a voucher if you go to the shelter, bring this ID evidence or whatever, and they'd be like, oh. So we're not even like at, how could we give them out? put them in baskets at Ralph's and Vaughn's and all the grocery stores. Just let them have them, because we're like not even over the hump of them even knowing they exist. And I hate to tell you that, but it's the truth. I've been in these clinics and I've worked there and I've talked to the people. So that's my boots on the ground report. Thanks.
And the idea that I particularly liked, because of that exact situation, is trying to come up with a way to provide them when you actually have the person and the animal and don't have the voucher. Because if you can take the step out of having to run across the voucher first, that would be great if we could figure out a way to do this. You would allow for many more spays and neuters and not have to turn people away or send them off on a mission which some will fulfill and some will forget about and move on with their lives. So I think that's a really good suggestion. We have one general public comment from Terry Austin as well. And now it's very easy to read on this one.
Yes, it's much better the second time. Thank you. Regarding the vouchers that you brought up that wasn't on the agenda, but about the vouchers, it is a difficult thing with the vouchers. It sounds like it would be easy, but one of the difficulties the department has had, despite efforts, is to get enough veterinarians who will take them. And then the other problem has been getting veterinarians who will not add a lot of ancillary costs. So the person goes in with their voucher that says on it $70, and they think they're getting a free thing, and then they get there, the pain medication is more, and the cone is more, and then they're asked if they'd like a blood test or whatever, and then they end up, being a sticker shock price. And for like my people, it's just not going to happen. So there are some issues with the voucher that really need some attention. And then as far as the budgeting goes of money, the other piece of paper that I gave you talks about the Animal Welfare Fund, and you'll see there's $1.6 million in that Animal Welfare Fund, and most of those items are unencumbered amounts of money that have been donated, and some of them are specifically earmarked for certain shelters. So I think there's an adequate amount of money there to both publicize spay-neuter without going and having to touch any spay-neuter money for advertising for spay-neuter. One of the issues that I find when I go into the shelters, and I would ask if any of you, when you walk in, you see this, is that there's a lot of clutter in a lot of the shelters. And what should be first and foremost when you walk in is your eyes should go to spay and neuter. Because what we know for sure, hard numbers, is that in the year 2000, the city was taking in 76,000 animals. By the first 5 years of the mobile spay-neuter clinic, that number had gone down to 56,000, where it has remained. One of our problems is we were hearing a lot about success, about adoption. None of your reports have a hard number of animals in and animals out. What you're getting constantly is percentages. An animal that 1 year is labeled as a neonatal or whatever, the next year can be labeled as a highly adoptable. You're hearing numbers, or rather statistics and percentages. Ask for a hard number. Noses in, noses out. And that'll tell you the story.
Thank you. And let's see. We have one more speaker on public comment. And we are going to cut this off, so anyone that has not handed in a slip will be done. Phyllis, if you'd like to.
Thank you, Phyllis Doherty. I'll make it very quick. That one of the problems that we're having, and we need to look at this, is that you have, and I don't want to just isolate best friends, Miss Barnett, everyone's out there saying we're no-kill. We have no problem anymore in this city. People are taking that seriously. There's no problem. We can go ahead and have a litter. We can give them out in the backyard. We can leave them in the street. We can take them into shelter and dump them at any time because there's no problem. We are no-kill in this city. There is hardly any euthanasia, and we got the problem solved, so we don't have to worry about it. And that is prevalent out there. They are hearing that all the time. So we have to be very careful about the two-edged sword of what we say to the public.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. We have to make it clear that no kill is a goal, that we're not claiming we're there. This is just what we're shooting for, and people shouldn't take that as a license to ease up. Well, thank you, everyone, and with no more business, no more speakers, we are adjourned.
Yeah, that was very good.